Okay, let's do a quick recap of everything explained so far to help tie it all together. In the introduction, I talked about cancer patient Elliot and how when he lost his VMPFC, or his ventromedial prefrontal cortex, it stunted his emotions in such a way where he was unable to make clear decisions. In part 1, I talk about the basics of brain biology and the general places where the brain processes certain types of information. In part 2, I try to describe what thoughts and emotions are and how the two systems are different, and also a little bit about how they interact. In part 3, I separate brain processing into 10 different layers to try to help make it easier to digest the amount of information that the brain tries to process simultaneously. In part 4, I try to write about ways a person can start looking inwards and begin to recognize these inner pathways themselves, and through that be able to recognize how their own inner subconscious works by trying to separate thoughts and emotions. Then in part 5, I begin to describe the general theory of the 8 cognitive functions by Carl Jung, and how personality is determined by how the brain prioritizes different areas of processing, which then produces what we define as personality. In short, do you prioritize thinking or do you prioritize feeling? But how do we measure all of this? How can we gauge this process? If I were to sum up everything in a single line, it would be this: actions speak louder than words. The brain is like a magic funnel where it takes everything from the external world and siphons it down into a single point of action. There's only one way we can measure how people think, and that is by observing what people say, what they do, and when. Plus a lot of trial and error in between. Isn't it fascinating how the conglomeration of experiences, personalities, relationships, ideals, and beliefs all funnel down to a finite point of the present where you're ultimately forced to choose a decision? But let's go deeper. How does this manifest? Once upon a time, when I was 16, I went to the store to buy deodorant. I could buy a singular stick for, let's say, $2, or I could buy a double pack for $3.50. This presented two possibilities. On one hand, I could buy the $2 stick and save some money now, or I could buy the double pack and save me some time and some money in the long run. In my over-analytical nature, it was here I began to realize that a person's personal experience and worldview would shape them to ultimately decide to pick one or two options. Choose A or B. Side note, it was through this I realized that economics wasn't simply a study of numbers, but a study of human decisions. Societies aren't defined by a spreadsheet or a math equation, but by the aggregation of all individuals deciding whether it's better to buy a $2 stick of deodorant or a $3.50 pack. But how does this all work together at once? Well, in a nutshell, through dopamine. Dopamine is the micro-impulse I mentioned that verified that these data points that we receive should go together. And when the data points align the way that we like them to, we are satisfied. If they don't align, then we aren't. There is a psychological test called the Stroop test that is used to help gauge ADHD and dementia. It's a pretty simple test. The individual will be flashed with words and colors rapidly, and the goal is to say the color of the word itself, not the actual word. So here's a basic test to compare and contrast. This first section will have all of the colors matched with the word. Red, blue, yellow, green, purple, orange, black, gray, pink, brown. Alright, now let's do this again. I'll switch up the colors and have you do it. Remember, try to name the actual color, not the word. And I'll have to stay quiet for the second part. Alright, you ready? 1, 2, 3, begin. Nice! How do you think you did? If you had difficulty doing it, that's because your dopamine receptors had already connected and put the data points together. Trying to break this system feels off-putting, unless you have a neurological condition. Before I started this series, I read a book called How We Decide by Jonah Lehrer, and this book was able to summarize a lot of different psychological concepts, but through how dopamine affects our decisions unconsciously. Dopamine is deeply involved with our brain's reward system. It's one of the brain's main happy drugs. One of the book's most memorable stories for me is about gambling addiction. Gambling addiction occurs from two halves of our emotions that normally fight against each other, working in tandem this time around. When sitting in slots at the casino, your brain is trying to create a pattern of how and when the slots should win. Whenever you win a little money, your brain fires a pulse of dopamine to verify accuracy and correctness. This is the micro-impulse behind our own logic. If we are incorrect, we don't get that dopamine high, and this creates dissatisfaction. This turns us away from doing the action. This type of design is used for gacha games and microtransactions in video games. The computer is said to be as random as possible, so no matter how deep you think you can read into the machine, you cannot predict it. But if you got 2 or 3 wins, then maybe you should win a 4th, right? So you keep playing even while mounting losses. But as you mount losses, the second brain hack occurs. Losing is painful. Your brain wants that dopamine high and tries to set that pattern, and the amygdala will step in if it's too much. You try to avoid the pain. This is why people seem to be in denial when their mounted losses are too much. Normally, the two systems work together to try to keep the individual safe and protected. However, in this one moment, you have a pleasure center rewarding you and keeping up the high, and a pain center preventing the escape. You get lost in your own brain's imbalance in the prison of fake indulgence. But it doesn't just stop there. What are your thoughts on politics? What are your thoughts on religion? Why do people refuse to change opinions, even when all the facts are laid out in front of them? It's because people are set in their ways, and changing is hard. People will believe what they want to believe, and belief comes before logic. Dopamine is that micro-impulse that sets our brain patterns into specific belief patterns. Why are more expensive items more effective? It's not because of any super special product ingredient. This is pattern recognition on how we associate more expensive as better and cheaper as worse. As a quarterback in the NFL is in the pocket, how does he know who and where to throw to? He has microseconds to decide who the best option is. He doesn't rely on his logic, which is slow. He relies on his instincts, which are way faster. Or in this case, his dopamine telling him that the gap is just wide enough to pass the ball. This was something that he trained for his entire life. In short, a sensory event happens and your brain processes the information through the 10 layers simultaneously, and then it either gets digested into the subconscious or it pops back out into our conscious thought. Oh boy. So something I mentioned at the beginning was that I wasn't going to get a master's degree to explain all of this information. I'm aware that the explanation of all I've shared is still an oversimplification. We are starting to reach the limits of what I understand. But there are still a couple of concepts I still need to share to help deepen understanding and wrap things together. The first will be on the flow of thoughts and feelings and how it led to my color theory. How did all of this come together at all? And the second will be a bonus. It's something I've learned recently. The flow of thoughts and feelings and how it relates to ego development theory, or as I'll call it here, the science of wisdom and self-awareness. So stay tuned.